Everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. If you guys are watching us live, it's probably Wednesday afternoon, or if you're in Australia, it's Thursday morning. And good morning. I hope tomorrow is going well for everyone. Uh, Today, we're really happy to go continue the conversation talking about change management. We've got Ron on. We'll let Ron go introduce himself in just a moment. Before we do that, if you guys are new here to Manufacturing Hub, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Every week, Vlad and I have conversations with other practitioners in the manufacturing and industrial space. This month, we are talking about change management as a theme. An issue that if you work and live in any part, well, really of the world, change management is something that you are either intimately aware of or maybe you run screaming every time it is brought up. But we're really happy to go continue the conversation and hopefully give you guys some tangible takeaways from that. If you guys are watching live, please feel free to go ahead and chat. Most people watch us live on LinkedIn. And then most of the rest of the people who are watching us live are on YouTube. If you guys have questions or comments, please feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. We will do our very best to go ahead and answer them during the show. If we don't get to them to the show, we'll do our very best to get to them after the show. But without further ado, everyone, officially welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 261. My name is Dave. The guy up here is Vlad. We'd like to welcome Ron to the show. Ron, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Thank you so much for joining us.
Ron, thank you so much for taking the time. For those that haven't seen one of your
It's good to be here.
presentations,
Really excited to be doing this.
awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Before we ask you questions on change management, for those that haven't seen one of your presentations, like myself and Dave have at ICC, could you give us a bit of an introduction of yourself, explain to us a little bit better your career journey, and ultimately what it is that you are doing today?
So I'm Ron Sherrod. I'm a staff automation engineer at Regeneron. Right now, my primary focus, I'm deploying a event-based architecture at Regeneron globally, looking at, deploying the UNS that everyone's so happy about, and then playing a little bit with robotics as well. So that's me at a high level right now.
How did you get started in manufacturing, industrial automation? Could you explain to us a little bit more on your background side?
So I got started in industrial automation right out of college. I did oil and gas. So big different thing from doing pharmaceuticals now.
Mhm.
And then, you had a little bit of project work and then really started to understand a few things, started playing a little bit at home. And that really is when I just said, this is what I really wanted to explore and tried to kind of go down that individual contributor path with my career of like learning more and growing more in this space.
Let me ask you, I guess I'm personally curious making the switch from oil and gas to pharma, right? In our industry, in many ways, it is often perceived that once you have deep expertise and knowledge of a certain industry, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to make that jump. How was it for you? Could you maybe explain to those who are considering a similar path or perhaps change? How was it for you?
Um, so I feel that jumping across industries the way I did from oil and gas to pharma, it brings a new perspective, right? Because it's a diversity of opinions, right? I learned how to do something initially a certain way because I did it in the oil and gas way, right? Your regulatory and your governing agencies are different. And so by me making that jump from oil and gas and now to pharma, some of those things still carried over, right? Like how we approach change control and things like that. There's still processes on both sides for, making change within the organization. Now, oil and gas is largely a continuous manufacturing process, right? Relative to at least the pharmaceuticals I work with, they're a lot more in batch orientation, right? So you have a little bit more like pausing in between that manufacturing when you move to pharma, but like still change is a big thing and how you control change, right? And
Mhm.
what you look at from a safety perspective, right? Whether you're focusing more on patient safety or environmental safety, right? The stresses are different between industries, but the broad concepts still apply. There's a risk that you must address, and how you address that risk really drives like the outcomes of how you move through that change. And swapping industries, right? Like math is math, right? I'm a chemical engineer by training, right? Like the chemistry didn't necessarily change. The scale changed, right? The reactors went from, being measured in feet, right, to being measured in liters. So that kind of
Gotcha.
deal, right? Yeah.
And let me ask you, I guess, a follow-up question to get us started on the topic that we wanted to discuss, right? So, operational excellence, change management. I think to an extent they are sometimes used, I would say, interchangeably in certain conversations, but ultimately it's all about making changes to the way I would say like processes are carried out as a result of looking to improve an organization, right? Whether that's process, people, or technology, the way I normally frame it. But I wanted to maybe get your perhaps definition of change management, but also start to understand what kind of KPIs do you normally see as they relate to specifically change management?
So for me, the definition of change management are the like those procedures that govern how you go about, yeah, I have to use the word change, how you go about making change occur, right?
Hmm.
Some of those metrics are very industry and, organizationally specific, right? I've seen typically, right? Sometimes people look at ROI very heavily for like, larger capital projects. Companies want to know, right? What's my ROI on this? What's my benefit, right? In a continuous process, right? There's a like, well, there's also this piece of like, how long do I have to take this operation down? And how much money does that cost me to take this operation down? Is it worth me spending the money to then make those upgrades? um but I'm also very big on like do 80% of the work, get 80% of the benefit, right? I can feel like some organizations as they're going through
Hmm.
change, they'll sit and they'll try to do every last bit, and sometimes that last 20% can eat your lunch, right? You'll eat up all your
Yeah.
ROI trying to accomplish that last 10%, that last 20% of your change. So it's very important to look at that. But right, you're bringing up a point though around like how do organizations really define success, right? And
Mhm.
that definition of success is different for every organization.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, for me, it has always been, or I don't want to say always, right? Because I think always is a very strong word, but in a lot of cases, it has been very reactive, right? So, from again, like my experience in a broader sense, I think that very few organizations like plan change as it needs to be like carried out as a result. Again, that could be changing a specific technology or changing their process, but ultimately they try to react, I would say rather later than sooner as to what's to come, right? And that could be again on the training side, that could be on releasing the right documents in place. So that's why I think it's an interesting like question, and I really like your comment of getting 80% there because again, I think it's important to recognize it's impossible to plan with absolute certainty, right? And I'm sure we'll maybe get into some general like examples a little bit later, but I think there's something to be said about being reactive on a certain percentage scale. Really appreciate that. Dave, what are your thoughts before I throw some more questions at Ron?
I I really like Ron's answer. I really like Ron's answer. I really appreciate it in large part because we've all seen so many initiatives fail trying to get to that last, 2 or 3%. And sometimes the last 2 or 3% is the entire initiative, right? So I know Ron said he does work in pharma. I've seen some of it in pharma. I've seen some of it in other industries where the whole goal of the project is to increase uptime, increase uptime or throughput by 1/4%, and that is everything to the organization. And in some cases, that makes a lot of sense. But when you're looking to do whole scale organizational change, coming in and getting that first 80% is going to allow different groups to see if it's apparent if this can be successful, especially within an operational excellence style and type of environment, without going and completely overwhelming everyone with every single with every single particular detail. Ron, I guess kind of question to you: when we talk about change management and we talk about operational excellence, do you consider them one and the same? Do you consider kind of change management as a part of operational excellence? How do you kind of internally think about it?
So I internally think that change management is a part of operational excellence, right? When I think about operational excellence, is that I can do everything to make a product for my customer in the most efficient way possible, right? And safest way in pharma, right? In the safest way possible, right? And then change management slides in under that operational excellence umbrella by really saying that, like, okay, I need to improve my process. How am I gonna do that without impacting my customer, right? Because you can see operational excellence like, oh, I have an OEE that's very high, or I have, a 99.9% uptime.
Mhm.
But you still do have to take downtimes every once in a while, right? You still do have to improve your process, because eventually over time, those KPIs and those metrics will fall while you're still operating in an excellent manner that you set in a standard that you set, from a time before. And Vlad touched on a point, right, about organizations jumping on, you know, missing out and trying to adopt new technologies. And I think, right, when we talk about change management, right, and you're kind of seeing it with AI now. Everyone's like, oh, I got to use AI, got to use this, got to do that, right? But we're not, a lot of organizations aren't being calculated with it, right? And that lack of calculation is like their tokens are literally just getting eaten. So every benefit that they would have had from the AI, right, is now eaten in tokens, right? Because they didn't go in knowing that, like, this is how we're going to do this. Or, everyone's saying AI broadly. And when I feel like people say AI, they are automatically thinking about LLMs, right? But you have
Mhm.
other machine learning techniques that aren't necessarily large language models that are trying to, get token heavy, right? That can solve the same problem, right? You don't always have to go to
Yep.
the LLM to do basic math, right? The calculator's been around for a while, stuff like that. So,
I would say AI, is a whole, I would say, like, can of worms that we can probably tackle in a moment. I still reflect, at least on my experience, as to, I would say, like, more traditional, whether that's like line rollouts or new equipment rollouts. And I still reflect, I would say, on how some of those projects went better or worse, right? And again, obviously, I cannot disclose the details of those projects, but I can tell you that it was always very difficult being part of, let's say, an engineering organization delivering a new, and again, it doesn't have to be anything revolutionary. It could be a new case packer, right? Or it could be a new palletizer that is on a newer platform than the operations team is used for. But then you need to figure out what is the training that we need to provide, what is the documentation we need to provide, how do we, in those environments that I worked on, at least, how do we conduct IQ, OQ, PQ type style of procedures. And for me, maybe one of the questions that's always interesting to explore is, who do you put maybe the emphasis to help on that front, right? Is it purely internal type of an activity? Is it something you would expect the machine builder, right, like the group that built the machine but doesn't necessarily understand your process context, to come in and train and help with? Or is it, maybe a third party entirely, whether that's an SI or consultant? I know that we all, obviously, the three of us have different experiences in the industry, but I'm curious, as you're having those conversations, maybe what are your thoughts on who is responsible for change management at the end of the day?
well, the organization implementing the change is the one responsible. When I say that, I'm like the one who commissioned that we're going to do this change, right? Because they're the
Hmm.
ones who have the governing procedures. They're the ones, when everyone's gone and the change is instantiated, that they're responsible for, now living with this change, right? So
Sure.
it's real. That's where the responsibility really falls. Now, like when you talk about SIs, machine builders, and various consultants, right? They each play a part in that orchestration of, like, initiating the change and, keeping the change happy. But it still lies hard within the org, right? Machine builders
Hmm.
come in, OEMs come in, they'll give you a box, right? That box works. That box, in a good case, right? The box does what it's supposed to do, right? And then it's
Hmm.
up for you to understand how that box does what it's supposed to do, and then write procedures around that box. Right, you might have consultants come in and help you better understand the box and then adapt them to your procedures, but at the end of the day, it's still falling back to you, right? Like when a government organization comes to audit, you know a pharmaceutical company, right? They're not going back to the machine builder necessarily. They're coming to the people who are operating the machine, saying like, "Hey, did you ensure this thing met the burden of proof to meet the predicate rule? You're sure you have good audit trails. You're sure you're making a safe product for patients, things like that."
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, right? And again, I really like to ask this question because again, it seems to me that complexity has certainly increased, right? Now in
Mhm.
manufacturing, you're tying all layers together. And so in the past, if you brought in a piece of equipment that you can, just press start, press stop, and there's maybe a few dozen faults, it's easy enough for the company to just pick up and go, right? But now we're starting to have conversations where it's fully integrated and in the entire OT and IT stack. It's very difficult. Again, there's a discussion to be had as to how good the documentation is, but usually the machine builder only focuses on their machine. So to an extent, I've seen projects where I would say the operational teams are left hanging without critical support for that change management, right? That's why
Yeah.
it seems to me that like integrators, and again, I use integrators, consultants a little bit interchangeably, right? But I think need to be held to a higher standard. It's no longer acceptable that you just bring in this piece of equipment, you put it down on the floor, it gets bolted to the concrete, it makes the
Yeah.
box, and all right, like, well, like, good luck, right? Because again, I think it's playing a more critical role. And to your point, on the AI implementation side, on the data side, right? If you don't understand the process, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, but also the operational team that then inherits that specific like machine. And again, I use machine
Yeah.
interchangeably. It could be a cloud solution, right? It could be a data provider, right? It could be, let's say, like Snowflake. It could be like whatever, for analytics purposes. But anyways, it's again like interesting to get your perspective for sure.
But now, at the same point, do you feel that
Mm.
end users like myself aren't asking for that? We're not holding, some of our integrators and SIs to a higher standard and not putting in the RFP. It's like, I want you to do this, and then I want 6 months of managed services afterwards, right? And I understand, none of that's
Yeah.
like I'm not saying like necessarily installing it should be a package deal, but should we start asking for that more deliberately when we send these RFPs out?
That's an interesting question, right? So I guess my perspective, right? So when I worked for P&G, and again, I'm going to say this broadly. I'm obviously not mentioning any like specifics of the project. The negotiating power of the company was quite high, meaning that if we approached, let's say, a machine builder or an SI to do a project for us, we could pretty much dictate any of the parameters of the engagement, right? Meaning that if we were comfortable handling all change management ourselves, we would do it in house. If we weren't, then we would tell the machine builder, like, hey, you need to provide training. You need to have, 3 engineers on site for commissioning. They need to be there for 3 months to make sure that there's proper pass down. And usually they would be almost forced to say yes to all those conditions because they understood the scale of the equipment that we were buying, right? It wasn't just for
Mhm.
one facility. It was like scaled across several facilities, at least, if not different business units. But for a small to medium sized manufacturer, what I have noticed is almost the opposite, right? When they go to an SI or a machine builder and they tell them we would like ABCD, they would
Mhm.
almost have no negotiating power in the sense that they would be told, well, like, no, we can't custom create these other things. We only care about building these machines the way they are. And we can obviously explain the documentation that already exists, but there is no incentive to create anything custom. And again, that's just my
Yeah.
personal experience, right? I'm not saying everyone is doing that way, but I think it's I guess de- depending on your position, you can negotiate these things. I would say better,
Yeah.
based on like the manufacturer that you're at.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Dave, what your
Okay.
thoughts?
I I'm actually really interested in Ron's perspective, and I really appreciate his comments. Where at the end of the day, if the end user in this instance, if the facility in this instance is saying we are going to do X, the responsibility at the end of the process lies upon the end user to make sure that they have the information, they have the documentation, they have the support or change management or anything else. I that is also typically where I come to, because it's very difficult to put the onus on anyone else in that equation. A couple or 3 weeks ago, we had Logan Terry on from LSI, and he was talking about change management from like the systems integrator point of view. And one of the comments we had, Ron, was that, especially when projects go out to bid, it is really hard to say, I'm going to go sell you this box, and this box is worth $10, right? But in order to get the most out of this box, you want this $10 box plus $2 of training plus $3.50 of change management and $25 worth of support over the next 5 years, right? And so if I were to come and say that, someone might be like, wow, that's a really interesting perspective. And if a guy like Vlad comes up and it says, I'm going to sell you this $10 box for $10, and then I never want to talk to you again, the guy selling the box for $10 when the budget is $10 and the expectation is $10 is almost certainly going to win the project over someone who says, I want to sell you this $10 box for $50. Having said that, I think that there is a need within the industry to have better documentation. I think there's a need within the industry, and maybe less so for larger organizations, but to Vlad's point, smaller to medium organizations to understand the repercussions of some of their choices. To me, when I work with large organizations, words like hypercare, like we need hypercare and support for X number of weeks or months is very normal. Every time I have a organization that is a small organization who uses the word hypercare, I'm almost very surprised to like see that word. I'm like, these are good signs, right? Like these are good signs. I'm happy that these signs are here, but it is all too often as Vlad has heard me and as the listeners have heard me say, one of the pain points that I've had with lots of kind of smaller groups who go deliver solutions is most of the time the handover is an engineering PowerPoint slide written by the engineer in the passenger seat of the car that is written as they're hungover driving to site on the last day of the project and is delivered by an engineer to basically only other engineers could possibly have an idea and understanding as to what this means. There is no train the trainer. There is very little support on the operations side very often, especially if it's not like machinery. There's very little support on the operations side of handover, of training the operators. And then it's kind of like, good luck. And if there's not a strong internal person to work on that change management or to go pull them back in or to go do any of those parts, all too often we've seen projects that just end up mothballed, not because they weren't necessarily good projects, but because there's no understanding or handover or support or change management to allow those projects to be successful.
Yeah. Ferraris, there's plenty of Ferraris, metaphorical Ferraris sitting on manufacturing floors. And the only time they ever get used is to go to grocery store, right? Like there's plenty of those sitting on
Absolutely.
manufacturing floors, right? Across many industries. And it's sad to see that, right? But then
Mhm.
that goes back to the idea of like setting the requirements and having your right internal customers when you set the requirements for
Yep.
what good looks like. um and I've gotten better about it as I've matured in my career around like getting the operator's perspective and not necessarily just being that young engineer on the floor
Yep.
that's like, oh, somebody gave me a project, I'm gonna go do a project and I'm gonna do the thing that was written in this project scope. And instead of going outside with your operators, talking to the people on the floor and saying
Yep.
like, hey, what do you really want out this thing, right? Because I don't want to build something, because but this experience, right? You learn like, I don't want to build something that no one's going to use, right? You might have a beautiful coach built Ferrari sitting in the garage, but then if nobody
Yep.
wants to touch it, right, you're not getting any of that benefit. So you start to understand that like organization, it's not just change management of like
Mhm.
managing this individual change. It's managing like how the organization will adapt to the thing that you are instantiating.
Absolutely. Can I ask? So you had mentioned that you have gotten better as you've done more and more of these, and I feel like we all one get better as we do more of these, which is good. For me, one of the pain points is that lots of organizations don't have like really good structured internal documents, so it's kind of just like a verbal handoff of these are things that I've done that have either worked well or not worked well in the past. but
Yeah.
then 4 years later, the organization can run into the same problem because there isn't, you know, in many organizations, well documented. This is what works. This doesn't work. From your perspective, I guess what are some of the things that you have learned that have been really valuable? Can we go ahead and maybe dig into one or two of those?
Yeah. So like you talking about things being written down, right? But the tribal knowledge
Mhm,
is a big portion and it's not written down, right? So
mhm,
going and talking with your operators, going and talking about the people, the going and talking to these people who work with this tool, with this piece of machine, with this process, and it's their day to day, you're gonna learn infinitely more than someone who like just I have a project I have to do, right? It's
mhm.
like, or like being I feel like I've learned the most from those people in my career. Like in oil and gas, my operators who had been on that unit for 20 years. And you're like, and you're trying to understand like why do we need to change this? And this guy or girl tells you, like, hey,
Mhm.
like this is broken because this thing over here broke 15 years ago, and then we
Yeah.
rerouted the pipe around, right? And it was never designed to run like that. So now this is how we're stuck in this position, right? And so that's how I personally got better, was talking to the people who knew more than me about really how work is done in an organization. Because I understand your position, right? You're coming in from
Mhm.
outside, you're trying to understand like how do you do change, and you gotta pick it up quick,
Yeah.
right? Versus as an end user, right? I have time, socialize, sit and talk, have that downtime to really learn like how an operation works, right? So in that way, everyone can more easily help each other get the job done. And that's something like as an engineer, that's not taught in school, right? Like that's something you have to learn, something you have to get burned by, right?
Yeah.
something, something you have to get burned by to then come around and say like, okay, this guy knows this unit better than me. I need to just go talk to him and he'll tell me the easiest way to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And then like being able to come back to your leadership and say like, I think that we should tackle it this way. That's a whole nother skill set. There's plenty of engineers that like don't have that skill set, that soft skill set of like being able to translate from operator to leadership, right? Operator
Yep.
says, you know, we want to do it like this. And then taking that and translating it like this is the benefit to the business. This is the benefit. This is how it benefits the organization, right? Just from the operator's perspective. And then translating that is powerful, very, very powerful.
Yeah, I would 100% agree, right? I think to maybe piggyback on Dave's earlier comment of the box for $10, right? I think the difference between, I would say, a more junior resource and a much more senior, engineer, manager, director, what have you, is the ability to flag the fact that, the machine builder or SI is proposing something that is, again, they're interested in obviously like selling you either billable hours or services, or here's a finished machine, they're going to go and sell the next one, right? But you need the ability to flag that and say like, well, look, for our organization, this is not going to work, but also we're not going to be willing to pay $50 for that $10 machine. So how about we scope it out specifically for a use case, then have the internal conversation like you were saying, Ron, with the operator. It could be the supervisors, right? Like obviously they want to understand different things about that equipment, but ultimately it's the ability to push back on, hey, I've been burned by trying to deploy this $10 machine and it went very poorly, because then I had to come in on weekends and help the operators make sure everything works, and I had to train the supervisor with the documentation that didn't exist. But ultimately, yeah, I think like this goes back to, now that I think about it, the conversation of the end user, I think, always dictates the pace, but ultimately utilizes resources differently to accomplish change management, right? So I'm rethinking how I maybe like formulated that question, but the end user is not alone, but at the same
Mm.
time, he is the one that dictates how it's going to go down. Because, like I said, I've been in that situation as well, and it can be a problem.
And to touch on that, right?
Mhm.
We both said, getting burned. Sometimes the end user never gets burned because the end user gets promoted or moves on to another position,
Sure.
right? And so like there's a balance in organizations around like maturing, right? And if you never fully reach the cycle of like some of those decisions coming back to burn you, right? You didn't learn your lesson, right?
Hmm.
And that's some, but that's not anything you can plan for, right? That's something that just like over your career, you hope that you get some good learning opportunities. So that way you can make a better product for everyone later down the road.
Yeah, of course. Some would say it's investment in yourself, right? You've made a
Yeah.
$200,000 mistake. Well, look, at least now you know
Yeah.
you're not gonna
Yeah.
repeat that twice. Let me ask you, I guess, what are your thoughts on like why this happens, right? Is it poor planning? Is it lack of involvement of these different maybe groups that will need to be part of those conversations? Is it just poor foresight? Is it, just I would say again, like right now we see on the market that many companies are bringing in quote unquote digital transformation or new sites, new lines into North America. Are they going to fall into the same patterns? And what are some of those problems, maybe in your viewpoint, in a broader sense, right? It doesn't have to be in your obviously like current work.
I mean, in a broader sense, it I can't pinpoint one thing or another, right? Because it's very
Sure, sure.
organizational to organization, right?
Hmm.
Um, right, like different organizations, because you're starting to touch on is really like problem solving. Like how do we problem solve as an org, right? Not necessarily change, but like how do I solve a problem, right? Because sometimes it's not just change. Sometimes I have a operational disruption. How do I get through that? And different orgs do that a myriad of different ways, right? So you have, because you have escalation pathways, you have project groups, and all those little groups have to work together. They need a common vision, and sometimes a common vision does help. But if the groups don't understand how to synergize together, then that's sometimes where you get some of that breakdown, right? Like if you
Hmm.
have an outside group within the organization that's running a project that, for a technology they don't really understand, they just know like this is a capital project, we need to do this thing. Sometimes it's hard for that group to understand the impact to that organ to that manufacturing side of the house, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of it can be avoided by, just being open. Being open. No one wants to feel that they don't know enough, right, to be doing the role that they've been given, that task they've been given. But sometimes
Yeah.
if you come out and say, "Look, I need help," right? I need you to help me understand. That eliminates a lot of problems down the road, especially if you do it early in the project and you find someone who like truly understands what's happening, right? It helps a lot. Pride can get in the way of some great projects, right? At the end of the day.
Hmm.
So like you always have to remember to like humble yourself at the end of the day and say, like, I don't know. I'll figure out the answer to give you what you want. But I have to come from a point of humility and servitude almost. And I can't come from a point of prideful kind of aspect of it.
Gotcha. Let me ask you maybe one last follow up before I pass it over to Dave. Right. So I'm curious, and again, I'm reflecting on my experience a little bit as well, and I would say that there's always an opportunity to be better, right? And in a sense, there's always an opportunity to have, I would say, better tools. But ultimately, I think allocating resources, but ultimately time to conduct, let's say, a postpartum, right? If the project like fails for whatever reason, to try and document that and then to pass that on to the next group, because ultimately again in a lot of the engineering roles, within 3 to 5 years you either move to a different, it could be location, it could be a promotion, right, or different group altogether. So I'm curious, maybe what are some interesting ways that you've seen change management be better, right? It could be learning tools, it could be documentation. Like where would you place an emphasis with, let's say you're leading a group, we need to be successful, here's what I would implement.
So for me personally, at least in this industry, like I was having this conversation today with my supervisor, right? We're working through a big change right now, a very large change. And and as we're working through this change, like some of the procedures have changed on like how we do change here in this organization.
Hmm.
Um, and I was talking to him and I'm saying we need to probably update an SOP, right? Update an SOP to kind of provide a little bit more guidance to the next person so they don't kind of fall into some of these like minor pitfalls that it's like, okay,
Sure.
I because now we're on the backside of a change. And we're
Hmm.
looking back right now, me and him, and we're saying, oh, if we had done this, it could have played out a little bit differently. Maybe it would have been smoother in the end. And
Yep.
having those candid conversations like that, I'm like, how can I do better? How can we do better to make sure when we do this the next time it's better? Is critical, like you're saying. For me, it's big procedures. If your organization, I feel like, is more tribal, right? Sometimes it's really having that anchor, like that anchor role that's in an organization, that person who's like, I would prefer to be like deep technical, right? And then
Hmm.
kind of passing that tribal knowledge to that person, and then finding their next successor to kind of give that almost like industrial elder type guidance, right? And to the projects, right?
Yep.
Because some organizations it's like that, where it's more anchor based and it's stored within the human than it is stored, documented, locked away in some Excel file somewhere. So,
I guess before I give to Dave, like my comment would be, it's interesting how things will change with AI, right? To me, it seems that
oh, yeah.
more documentation will be created, but at the same time, who's going to spend the time reading AI generated documentation? And to me, that, is going to be the key to, I guess, like understand how the pass downs are being done through different teams, like in individuals. I don't have an answer, but I'm very curious to see, where the new generation of engineers comes in and how they actually work through change management and some of those learnings. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Run said industrial elder, and I'm immediately picturing Derek Chambers in his wizard costume over here. But no, I think Run, you brought up some good points, and I particularly liked your comment a couple of minutes ago, basically asking for help or suggesting people ask for help. And I would 100% agree with those comments, right? Most of the time, or maybe not most of the time, a lot of the time, there are other people within the organization who know the answer to the question, or other people within the organization who have watched the organization go down this path, especially some of those older folks who have been at the facility for 10 years or 20 years or 45 years or whatever that is. I once sat down at an unnamed facility, and we went around the room, and the people said their name. They said which group they work for, and then they said basically how many decades they had been working at this particular facility. And my favorite was a gentleman named Joe, who I've talked about several times here, who showed up 40 minutes late to our 60-minute meeting. And he said, "Hi, I'm Joe. I work in this group. I stopped counting at 35 years," or something along those lines. But fantastic fantastic to be able to go answer questions if you could get past kind of that tough outer shell. And so going and pulling in all of those particular resources to go ask them questions. Most of the time, the thing you're trying to solve today has been at least attempted to has been solved once or twice, or I don't know, every 18 months for the last 45 years. And if you know the correct people to be able to go and ask the questions to, they'll be able to give you I don't know, a summary, maybe very biased, maybe only semi-biased, when it comes to all of that. So no, I agree, and I really liked what you said. What you said there. We actually have a comment in here from Prandeep, saying that towards Vlad's comment that he thinks the documentation will be tagged with human versus AI, and human writing will be used for very high density novel judgment that the AI is not yet able to emulate, and that it would be applicable for a very long time. I hope we don't stop humans writing documentation. I mean, I've read tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation, and a lot of it is bad, right? Like a lot of it is bad. A lot of it is unintelligible. A lot of that is the hungover engineer trying to write a documentation on the way to site in order to go pass over those particular pieces of knowledge and engineering. I certainly hope we don't get to the point in which Vlad's ChatGPT is talking to Ron's Claude, which is talking to my Gemini, and then suddenly, I don't know, we've built a spaceship and we now have data centers on Mars. or something along those lines. I
Right.
hope we don't. I hope we don't get to that point.
But to
But
that point on
yeah.
AI generated documentation, right? I've seen a good bit of it recently, and it's, sometimes I do like to say like, well, what does Claude think? What does Claude
Mhm.
think about my test protocol? Let's see. And it's like, how can you help me improve my human written test protocol? And then I read it, and then I'm like, okay, this is pretty robust, but this doesn't
Yep.
make any sense, right? Like, why did I test this? Why did I test the same thing 6 times? Like, I didn't need to do that. Like,
Mhm.
I didn't need to test that small nuance to like
Yep.
really understand if this thing achieved what I needed to achieve. Um, so I feel like it can result almost in inefficiency if you don't know what you're looking at, right? When done a little hastily and not watching what you're doing.
Absolutely. I suppose I'd like to transition us maybe into, and we talked a little bit about some of the tangible ways that you've seen change management work. We talked a little bit about the initial RFQ and RFP. When you're doing the project planning, Ron, I guess I feel like the entire project hinges on the planning, right? Like if we have a good plan and we've got good documentation and we have people who have bought into the initial plan, there is a fairly high chance of success versus we have none of, I mean, if we have none of those things, there is a very slim percentage of the chance. So when you are doing those initial steps, you talked about talking and working with operators. What else are you doing now, having gone through this cycle, several times or several dozen times in your career, when it comes to looking at projects kind of with the eye towards, hey, we're actually going to have to implement this project? What are you doing now that you weren't doing, or what are you not doing now that you used to do in the past?
Well, now I'm thinking, when I first started, I wasn't thinking what questions are my integrators I'm reaching out to for bid gonna ask. Now I'm
Hmm.
trying to answer those questions up front. Now I'm trying to ensure that I do have like hypercare in it. And
Yep.
what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to really drive that RFP process to no longer result in a bunch of different fruits being presented
Yes.
back to me. And instead it's all apples,
Hmm.
right? Like I want to compare apples. I don't want to compare tons of apples, oranges, and bananas because I wasn't rigorous enough in what I specified that I wanted, right? And so then that comes down to understanding like, do you know what you want?
Hmm.
Right? Because sometimes, right, you don't know what you want, but you want to get an idea of how much this is going to cost you, right? And it's like,
Yep.
oh, I don't know if I want to go down that path if like my orders of magnitude, but then lo and behold, right, you get an RFP back and it's like all of a sudden, oh, the $10 box is now $8. And it's like, oh, I
Hmm.
thought it was going to be 10 and now
Hmm.
it's 8. It's like maybe I should do it. But then you walk down that path and all of a sudden now the $8 box is now $16. So
Hmm.
like that kind of space like starts to really that's what I've tried to learn to avoid when I'm doing project planning. And a hard thing is dependencies.
Hmm.
Understanding your dependencies to do your project relative to everyone else, because that'll eat your lunch too.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I appreciate that. As a person who's read some absolutely hellacious RFPs, I've actually read a couple so far this year that I get to the bottom of them and I'm like, I'm actually not sure what they want me to do. I'm like, I need to go back to the top and maybe there's like a process overview.
Yeah.
Maybe these guys can articulate what they want, not just we have, 42 different areas and we're trying to do X out of all of those 42 areas, but we're not telling you what's in each of those areas. And everything will just be fun, kind of fly by the seat of the pants sort of opportunities.
So something I've never really asked anybody. Um, what is y'all's definition of good in an RFP? Right? Do you want a lot of background front matter? Like this is what the company's all about. This is what we're trying to achieve. Or would you prefer if I just hit you with bullets and be like, I need this much IO, this type of bioreactor, and this type of space, and I need it put here, and I need it all done at this timeline. Like, what do you really want to see?
I can answer that if you want Dave me to
I,
take
I
that.
love this because I feel like
Yeah.
Vlad and I's answers are either going to be one-to-one identical or the two most dissimilar answers anyone can possibly give. So Vlad, please go ahead, go first. I love this question, Ron.
Well, look, so I guess like having been on both sides of the table, right? I would say that a general SI will evaluate the opportunity given to them and then either submit a proposal that's going to be time and materials, meaning that you're basically paying for blocks of hours, or they will bid the entire project, right? And so for me, their answer would almost like to an extent tell you how confident they are in the scope that you have submitted, meaning that if you define it very loosely, then all of the risk basically falls on the integrator, right? So if they submit a fixed bid, then they're taking all the risk. Conversely, if you have given them a very specific scope, they are confident that they understand what needs to be delivered. And again, I guess the lines are going to be different with maybe larger groups than smaller groups. I don't think you need to specify down to how many IO points per se, but you could at the very least say like which, if it's again, if it's a new group and maybe they don't know any better, you need to tell them which control system you're expecting, what kind of software stack you're expecting, what is or isn't going to be provided. And I guess there's a lot of like side details, but ultimately you need to come to an understanding where it's clear enough, I would say, for them to be comfortable to almost submit a fixed bid. That way de-risks on both sides, right? Like you understand what the fixed bid looks like and they are comfortable bidding a fixed rate, because again, I'm sure you've seen this as well, right? There's going to be engineering change orders or ECOs that will come in, and like you said, the box, instead of being $8 is going to be double or sometimes triple the price on the back end. I don't think anyone wants that, right? Even a systems integrator is not very comfortable having those discussions, because they will eat, like they will have a certain margin that will be okay, well, we'll eat some of this, it will make this change, it's not a problem. But as there's more and more changes because of the initial uncertainty, they will at some point have to say, well, like, look, there's just like, we've put in so many hours, this is no longer profitable. And if you're too unflexible at that stage, they can simply walk away. And I've seen projects where it becomes a legal battle because, again, it's more advantageous for them to just walk away than it is to get it to the finish line, so to speak, right? And I guess like I'm answering it kind of, it depends, I suppose, but I think in general it hinges on that like fixed versus T&M type of bid.
I guess I'm going to answer a little bit more specifically. To me, a RFP that I can read through once or I read through twice, and knowing very little about the organization or the facility, right? So like if there's a block up top that says, hey, we're X company, and if we've got 10 facilities across North America, we have 10 facilities across North America, we are looking to do work at X facility or X, Y, and Z facilities. And then from that kind of I guess I'm a systems and a process guy, right? Like I want to have an idea of what the system or process is, or the direction that the group wants to go at the very end. And so the more information that can be provided, the better of a price and the better of a project that can be, that I guess one could go propose or one could go through the process of bidding. So if I can go read through it once, or if I can go read through it twice and I'm like, I understand what they want, that's a really good first step, right? There are probably going to be questions or particular, they're probably going to be particular questions, right? To Vlad's point, a group that is looking to do ignition and Rockwell, or ignition and Siemens, or ignition and pick any of your Codesys flavors is going to be a different is going to be a different project than, hey, we want to do plant packs and we want to do Rockwell, or we're do a Siemens house all the way through from top to bottom. That's the only thing we want, right? And so being able to articulate what the group is, if you're going through the process of bidding, that is important, and being able to answer those questions. I do a lot of system design. And so like, especially when I'm doing system design, if there are examples of, hey, this is what our screens and everything look like currently, that is really helpful to be able to go ahead and articulate of, yes, this is a fairly easy design, and hopefully they have global templates and global projects. Or you look at it and you're like, it's going to take Vlad 45 hours in order to go duplicate every single one of these pages. We need to realize that this is, particularly dense, and realize that this is going to be a particularly difficult project. So the more information that can be provided, in my experience, reduces kind of the back and forth of questions. And the reducing the back and forth of questions is going to provide the best apples to apples comparison. Having said that, there will almost always be questions, and being able to articulate and answer the questions is also kind of at the make or break phase. I had a list of questions that came back, and it was basically like, we've given you all of the information that we're going to give you in this proposal. For this proposal, you guys just have to guess based upon the lack of information there. And I'm like, man, they might have actually done us a favor if they just didn't answer any of these questions. They could have just like gave us one of those shruggy emojis, and we would be at a very similar level of where we currently are. But being able to go articulate the answer to those questions, because in my experience, the people who are bidding these projects, they want the projects to succeed. They want to hopefully win the project, and so they're going to go spend the time and effort in order to go down the path to be able to do that. They're going to spend the time and effort to be able to go and do that. And so they are as an end user, they're your resources and tools to be able to go help answer specific questions. And lots of times they're going to see things that an end user may not see. And they'll be like, hey, if we do this, we can go save 15% off of the entire project because this is much simpler, or this is the path we want to go, or we're doing one facility and then we're doing two more facilities very similar to it. We should spend the extra 5% up front, go build some global projects and templates, and go roll that out across all of the facilities. And the better of the groups will know that and will say things. The groups who maybe don't know better are just going to go ahead and bid it straight. And so the first project may cost $10, and then the next projects may also cost $10, as opposed to the first project costing $12 and the rest of the projects costing $4, sort of things.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it all boils down to risk. Like, again, I think even to our earlier conversation on kind of like general change management and how we can be more foresightful, how do we predict and mitigate risk, right? Like, again, and to your question, Ron, I think it's, again, like both sides are looking to be successful, but the perception of risk is different, right? Like for a large manufacturer, bringing in maybe an R&D piece of equipment for a few months is not as detrimental to a small SI that's coming in for those 3 months to integrate that piece of equipment, right? If they fail, that's a huge problem. But so the risk is perceived differently, right? So if you're on the larger side, you can just say like, well, like, look, this is all the scope we have. We're not going to provide any more. Like, best of luck. But that person may decline because their perceived risk is, like I said, of a different scale. But it's a difficult question to answer. I definitely appreciate it, because I'm also like reflecting on how some of my RFPs and RFQs and just like projects have went in the past. And it's not an easy like conversation with whichever partner you're speaking with.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So we talked a little bit about some, maybe I would say like challenges. We talked a little bit, I would say, like opportunities, maybe some interesting tools. Do you have any maybe idea, or I would say examples of like very successful projects where you were just like, hey, like this went really well, and we look back and it's because of like XYZ reason? We did proactively talk to like operators, we talked to plant management, we talked to like IT. Maybe like, are you able to share again, like broadly, a story where everything kind of fell into place and everyone was very happy about the change management?
Deploying a well-known SCADA system, right? There was a lot of, I think what kind of particularly made that very successful was the fact that the team that I was working with was very good on grabbing like user stories. The organization was in the right position for like innovation and like saying, we're going to try to do something different. So you had an organizational inertia. I had a large support system behind me to say we are going to be successful. And sometimes that's what it really takes, right? Like an organization saying we are going to be successful, and not necessarily saying I don't know how it's going to work. Saying how can asking those questions of how can we make this work, what
Hmm.
that kind of thing, and then also having a problem that you're trying to solve. Too many times have I seen I want a new technology, but I don't know what it's going to solve, right? But coming and saying like I want to end this problem I have right now, and I believe this is the right tool to do it. And now we just need to go execute and solve that problem. But also hearing that problem come from the shop floor, right?
Hmm.
Because that ensures that it's going to get used because your shop floor, your manufacturing organization is asking, saying, I have a gap and I need this gap closed, right? Can you help me close this gap? Because you have manufacturing bought in,
Mhm.
you have leaders that want their organization to be successful bought in, and then here comes an internal integrator like me, an internal engineer like me to say like I can close this gap for you, right? That's when I feel like my projects were like extremely successful. Um,
Let me
and when
ask you
they
a follow-up
fizzled
question.
out,
Go ahead. Go
okay,
ahead. Sorry.
no,
So,
no, that's
sorry.
fine.
Go
Go,
ahead.
go, go.
I was going to ask you a follow-up. The thought of user stories, right? So for me, I would say, like, again, like reflecting on my approach, it has always been, again, to the point of like tribal knowledge, me just going to talk to operators and just like write down some scribbles, right? And then I would do my best to communicate some of those design choices to the group that's building the solution. I'm curious if you've had, I would say, a better process or maybe a different process where you were a bit more diligent than I have in the past, right? And again, obviously, it has worked for me on some specific projects, but I'm wondering, how did you approach these conversations? How did you like triage what people were asking for? I'm sure you had probably some interesting requests as well, but what was the process like?
More recently, it's been like collecting user stories is more workshop style. It's not like necessarily me going out. It's more like, you know, I'm a part of it. I have some of my engineers and my devs with me. I have leaders from manufacturing. You have operators, and everyone's just having a conversation. And as you're having that conversation, you're using whatever diagramming program you want, and you're kind of organizing like how people work, right? You
Hmm.
start to understand, like, okay, and then as you start to drive, and it's really a talent. I don't have like I have someone that I work with. He's wonderful, wonderful at that talent, right? Of like really kind of like translating between the groups of like, well, what problem are you really trying to solve? Like, you know, you're saying that the system is slow, or that you don't, or that your data's not moving as it should, but what's really causing that? It like this is a symptom. So then like we need to
Hmm.
figure out from another organization what's really the disease, right? So like having all those people in the room really drives that a better user story. And then once you get a good user story, then you can really, if you're talking about like moving data, then you can kind of generate sort of a data contract, right? To say like, I need this data to move from here to there. I need this is the small smidge of data that this one particular organization needs to be successful, but that smidge of information might not be the same as the other part of the organization. And when you put all that in like a tangible document, now you can start to see those connections a little bit better, of that this one device produces a bulk of data, right? But
Hmm.
then this organization needs this organization needs that, and they are using it for different purposes. So you need to make sure that goes where it needs to go. And I feel like seeing that more recently has really, really been powerful for me to see like that connection across groups and showing how the same data is used differently,
Hmm.
and that's driven from user story development.
It's very interesting, right? As you describe it, I guess, again, like I reflect back on some of my initiatives, and I don't think they were ever as intricate, I would say. And ultimately, I wish there were more, how would I say it? Like, I guess, like knowledge sharing and maybe courses that, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, that aren't taught in engineering, where it's a little bit more applied and experience based. But at the same time, maybe this is design sprints in software in general, but I think in manufacturing, there is that context and things are done differently, right? Because you're not just writing a phone application or a website. Like these are complex systems that impact different disciplines on the engineering side, on the plant floor side. So it's super interesting. I'd be curious to see if there's books that are published on how to like run this process that you've described in a better or more streamlined fashion. So I definitely appreciate that one. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess we do a lot of work on the user story side, similar to how Ron had described it, similar for the reasons as to how Ron describes it. And then doing our best to connect user stories to KPIs and then how we deliver to the KPIs and then back to the user stories. We have found it generally hits how is needed within an organization. And then specifically, if you go capture the user stories of the people within the organization that are going to go help drive large portions of the success and the change management, it goes and it helps with the change management if you can show the specific user story or the use case, their pain point. We have found that it eases a lot of that. Having said that, a lot of that comes from traditional software development. I think a lot of what I see on the manufacturing, I guess a lot of what we do on the manufacturing side and a lot of the success that I've seen on the manufacturing side are people who kind of took the deck of cards of the OT playbook and the software development playbook and shuffled them together in order to attempt to find success. Fantastic. Ron, this has been amazing. We lost you on video. Are you still there, Ron? Oh, we may have lost Ron. If you guys are with us live, give us just a sec. Let's see if we can get Ron back.
I guess while we wait on that, Dave, maybe we can give some community comments, right? So both of us are planning to attend. Hey, Ron, how's it going?
Hey, sorry.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
No problem.
Can
I
you
was
hear me?
gonna,
Okay.
yes, sir. I was gonna mention before we maybe get into the final questions that we have prepared for you, that Dave and I will be at Automate in only a couple of weeks now,
A
right?
month. Yeah.
In a month. I don't know, Ron, if you were planning to be there, but it is a very interesting trade show. Definitely
I
recommend.
won't be at Automate this year.
Mhm.
I've been conversing very heavy this year, and I will be deep in UNS deployment.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That should be fun. I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes. Will you be at ICC again this year, Ron? Has your
Yes,
schedule solidified?
that is the plan to be at ICC this year. I haven't booked my travel yet, but that is the plan to be there. I might be flying directly from ICC from another location, but we'll get there. I will get
Gotcha.
I
there.
love it. From an
Yeah.
undisclosed location to
Location.
Sacramento, maybe back to the undisclosed location.
Exactly.
Um, that'll be awesome. But Ron, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We do want to go ask the last questions that we get to ask all of our guests. And
Mhm.
as you may or may not know, or as our listeners know, the first one is one of my favorites, right? It's predict the future. So can we ask you what you think that the future of change management or what you think the future of the industry is going to look like in the next 2 to 3 years?
So in the next 2 to 3 years, I'm very big on there's IT OT convergence occurring, and in the combination with AI,
Mhm.
um, you're going to start to see some single platforms that become really really performant, right? Like you're going to be able to build everything on a single platform and go end to end, and it's not going to be so much of like I need to do this from like a coding perspective, but I need to do this from just drag and drop and it'll just work. Like how they showed to like prove it with i3. Like i3x is probably going to supercharge a few things like in the manufacturing space and they really push a lot of things up. But the thing is, I don't see a monopolistic sort of monolithic thing coming, right? I still feel like there's going to be good competition amongst the different vendors that produce these different platforms. I don't see anything like the Microsoft Office of industrial SCADA really showing up and saying, 99% of all compute use this, right? I don't see that coming, but that's where I'm going to say the
Mhm.
future is going
Okay.
on the bright
Uh,
side.
I like it. I like it. Thank you for that. Next up, we'd like to ask for some career advice. So if someone is kind of early to middle career, what's one piece of advice? What's one piece of advice you give? What's the best piece of advice that you've received?
Um, Following what makes you happy, like staying on your bliss path, right? I don't know if anyone's ever heard that. Staying on your bliss path is critical.
Mhm.
Um, I work for my current employer because I love an adventure, right? Like I love the challenge, the good and the bad that comes with it. I love being in the trenches and like because doing what I do makes me happy. So even the bad days
Mhm.
are still good days, right? And I think that's
Yep.
probably and my grandfather always said, if you work, if you enjoy what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Like, no, you'll work, you'll just you'll work, but you'll just enjoy what you do even on the bad days.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that.
I've had my grandparents give similar advice, and I also
Yeah.
agree. Even if you love what you do, it is still work. There are still the days that remind you there's a reason you get paid in order to go do these things.
Yeah.
Awesome. How about a book recommendation, please?
Um, in this space, I would read the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. It's about like industrial DevOps and like kind of how we work through problems as an organization. Really good book. I recommend it to a lot of people. Um, it's just worth a good read. Somebody had me read it when I first started at another role, and honestly, like I tell everyone, read that book. That is one book in our space that I feel like everyone should kind of take a peek at.
Nice. That is
Appreciate it.
fantastic. I feel like this may have been suggested at some point in the past, but it's been a while. Vlad, have you read this one?
I listened to the audiobook, right? It's about I guess it's the best way I would describe it is it's like the goal, but more on the IT and software
Okay.
Yeah,
space, right?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
So
perfect.
it's
No,
it's like
awesome.
project management and like what works, what doesn't, right? It is very relevant to the change management theme as well, but more again like from software and IT perspective.
No,
yep.
perfect. I think that's good. That may or may not be what I listen to this weekend. So thank you for that suggestion, Ron.
You're welcome.
How about an interesting idea or innovation? What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to? What do you hope we could just go ahead and make?
I'm waiting for my glasses to be able to replace my phone. That's like really
Okay.
what I'm really pushing on.
Have
Um,
you tried some of the previous solutions?
so right now I'm wearing Meta AI displays, so they have
Okay.
Okay.
the little display in them, but it's still not replacing my phone. And
Hmm.
Hmm.
then a lot of the other augmented reality things out there, they're either too big and bulky or they need like some type of dongle. I
Yep.
really am looking forward to the day when I can just pick up my glasses
Hmm.
and there you go. I don't need my iPhone anymore.
What are you doing
Um,
with the
Interesting.
Meta AI displays? I guess I'm really curious now.
so initially, I was just, I like the tech, right? I feel like the tech was like mature enough for it. The fact
Yep.
that they had a display that you can't see. And then the fact that they give you like a neural band of control. I use it, sometimes we'll shop at like H Mart, and so like they can
Hmm.
translate live for me while I'm shopping at H Mart, or either just general like notification, right? Like if I get a text message from my wife or something like that, it pops up in my eye.
Really?
It doesn't distract. I don't have to look down at my phone. I don't look down at my watch. I can still engage and have a conversation with somebody while I'm still perceiving information. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
right, as well as like you had the ability to listen to music and things like that. But some of the things after talking to a few other people like in my organization is you know we work with patients, right? Like
Hmm.
there's patient groups where it's like they're trying to use this technology as well.
Yeah.
If if um if you're hard of hearing, right, they can live caption. So like we could have this conversation in real life and
Okay.
it can live caption, so that's helping people with less than perfect hearing like see things, right?
Mhm.
During this call, right, if I was more prepared of an individual and had transcripted everything. Technically, it could have like presented my transcript right in front of my eye, and no, I'd be
Sure.
like, because you can teleprompt. So there's a lot.
Okay.
Um, Meta's SDK isn't as open as like some of the other ones, but I wanted a more finished product that I could just use, right? So
Super
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah, appreciate that.
Now,
yeah,
do you wear prescription glasses, Ron?
yes. So these are
And
prescription
you have prescription lenses in the
in
glasses,
the
and
glasses.
those
Yep.
work well.
Yeah, they work really well. There's a little bit
Interesting.
in the right eye because like how the screen is overlaid in between the
Yeah.
glass. Sometimes you do get like this weird like refraction that's kind of
Yeah.
distracting, but other than that, that's fine. And getting used to the monocular because it only appeared the screen is only in one eye and it's not in both, right? So
Okay.
you have a
Yep.
monocular sort of vision. So kind of learning how to focus, as well as how heavy they are. They're like probably 4 times as heavy as normal glasses. So the bridge
Oh
of your
wow.
nose sort of starts to hurt for the first few weeks because you have to
Okay.
get
So I,
used
I
to the
was gonna
weight.
say you have very chunky glasses on.
Yeah, they're chunky
Um,
for a reason.
they're chunky, and it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
I thought it was a style choice. I
yeah,
mean, I suppose it is a style choice. It's just a style and technology combo choice. But no, that is that is particularly interesting.
yeah.
Vlad is currently sending a pair of AI glasses to his house, and that's what I'm going to see him in when I talk to him tomorrow. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for that.
No problem.
And then last question for you, Ron, is how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with?
Anybody can reach out. I'm always looking to talk, to have like conversations like this, and talk to people around cool ideas in the OT space. Um, if you just want to bounce off the ideas off, you want a little help deving something in Ignition, right? I'm always game to like kind of stretch that muscle. I love stretching that muscle as much as I can to, grow and be a better engineer at the end of the day.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Ron, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much
It's
for
been
joining
wonderful.
us,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much for listening with us. I am sure we will have Ron back on, hopefully at some point before he gets new glasses that can go replace everything, because I imagine we're still a little ways off on that. If you
Yeah.
guys are not already, please make sure that you're following or connected with Ron on LinkedIn, and that you're following Manufacturing Hub as well as Vlad and myself. If you guys have made it this far on YouTube or podcast format, you're absolutely fantastic. Thank you guys so much for that. Remember to do the like and subscribe and rate us 5 stars and all of those other things. When I remember to ask you guys, Vlad launches the podcast and more people listen, which is pretty awesome. Until next week, we'll see.